The year was 1880, and America stood at the crossroads between the dying frontier and the birth of an industrial giant. In the bustling city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where steel mills belched smoke into the gray sky and immigrant families crowded into tenement buildings, power belonged to those who owned the factories and the politicians in their pockets. This is the story of 7-year-old Emma Kowalski, her immigrant mother Anna, and Thomas Brennan, a man whose past sins would drive him to seek redemption through sacrifice and vengeance. But before we begin, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're listening from. The morning whistle of the Carnegie Steel Works pierced the gray dawn air like a banshee's wail. Thomas Brennan pulled his worn coat tighter against the October chill as he walked down Liberty Avenue, his boots splashing through puddles that reflected the orange glow of the blast furnaces. At 38, Thomas had the weathered hands and stooped shoulders of a man who'd spent his life working with steel and iron. His dark hair was streaked with premature silver, and his green eyes held the haunted look of someone carrying heavy burdens. He'd been in Pittsburgh for 3 years now, trying to escape a past that followed him like a shadow. The Kowalski boarding house sat on a narrow side street, squeezed between a bakery and a tailor shop. Anna Kowalski met him at the door, her flour-dusted apron and tired smile a familiar sight. At 32, she was a widow who'd fled the poverty of rural Poland with her young daughter, seeking the promise of America's industrial cities. "Good morning, Mr. Brennan," she said in her careful English, still colored by her native accent. "I have your lunch prepared." "Thank you, Mrs. Kowalski. How's little Emma doing with her letters?" Anna's face brightened. "She is learning so quickly. Already she can read simple words in English. I hope to send her to the public school next year when she turns 8. 7-year-old Emma Kowalski appeared at her mother's side, clutching a worn rag doll and peering up at Thomas with curious dark eyes. She was small for her age, with her mother's delicate features and dark curls tied back with a faded ribbon. "Hello, Mr. Brennan," Emma said shyly in her mixture of Polish and English. "Mama, can I show him the letters I learned?" Thomas knelt down to Emma's eye level, his stern face softening. "I'd like that very much, Emma. Are you being a good helper for your mama?" The little girl nodded solemnly. "I help with the washing, and I can count to 20 now. Mama says if I work hard, maybe I can have a different life than this." The simple hope in the child's voice hit Thomas harder than he expected. Emma's innocence reminded him of everything he'd failed to protect in his past life. "Your mama's right," he said gently. "You keep learning, and you'll have many choices when you grow up." Anna smiled gratefully, but Thomas caught the worry that flickered across her features. After 3 years of living in the same building, he'd learned to read her moods. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Kowalski?" he asked quietly. Anna glanced down at Emma, then back at Thomas. "Perhaps we could speak privately later, Mr. Brennan? There are difficulties." Thomas nodded, understanding. "Of course. I'll stop by this evening after work." The Carnegie Steel Works was a cathedral of industrial might, its massive furnaces and towering smokestacks testament to America's growing power. Thomas worked as a puddler, stirring molten iron with long rods to burn out impurities. It was dangerous, exhausting work. As he took his position at the furnace, Thomas's thoughts drifted back to his former life. He'd been a deputy U.S. Marshal in Montana Territory, part of the thin line of law that tried to bring order to the frontier. But one terrible mistake, one moment of cowardice when it mattered most, had cost innocent lives and driven him east to lose himself in the anonymity of industrial America. When the evening whistle finally blew, Thomas made his way back to the boarding house. Anna was waiting for him in the small parlor, her hands twisted in her apron. "Emma is upstairs playing," she said quietly. "We can talk now." Thomas settled into one of the worn chairs, studying Anna's worried face. "What's troubling you?" Anna took a shaky breath. "There are men who have been coming around the neighborhood, Irish men who work for someone called Sullivan. They say all the boarding houses and shops must pay them money each month for protection." Thomas felt his blood run cold. Patrick Sullivan was a ward boss who controlled much of the South Side through political connections and organized intimidation. "How much are they asking for?" Thomas asked. $5 each month, Anna whispered. Mr. Brennan, I may perhaps $12 profit after all expenses. If I pay them, there will be nothing left for food, for Emma's clothes, for anything." Thomas nodded grimly. $5 might as well have been 50 for a woman in Anna's position. "Have you considered going to the police?" he asked, already knowing the futility of the suggestion. Anna's laugh was bitter. "The police? Mr. Brennan, these men told me the police chief himself sends them his regards. They are not afraid of the law. They are the law, at least for people like us." The helplessness in her voice stirred something dark in Thomas's chest. He'd seen this before on the frontier. Powerful men who preyed on the weak, confident that their connections would protect them from consequences. "When are they coming back?" he asked. "Tomorrow evening. They said if I don't have the money ready." Anna's voice broke. "Mr. Brennan, I'm not just worried about the money. Little Emma, she's so trusting, so innocent. What if these men decide to make an example of us?" Thomas studied Anna's face, seeing the fear that every mother in her position must feel. Emma was everything to her. The reason she worked 16-hour days. The hope that made all the sacrifice worthwhile. "I'll be here tomorrow evening," he said quietly. "When they come, I'll handle it." Anna looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "Mr. Brennan, I cannot ask you to risk yourself for us. These are dangerous men, with powerful friends." "You're not asking," Thomas replied. "I'm offering. That little girl upstairs deserves to grow up safe, and you deserve to live without fear." What he didn't tell Anna was that he'd already made his decision. He'd failed to protect innocent people once before, and it had haunted him for 3 years. This time would be different. This time, he would stand and fight, no matter the cost. The next evening came too quickly. Thomas had spent the day at the steel mill in a fog of dark memories and darker plans. For the first time since arriving in Pittsburgh, he'd strapped on his old Colt .45, a reminder of the life he'd tried to leave behind. When the evening whistle blew, Thomas walked slowly back to the boarding house. Anna was waiting for him in the parlor, her face pale with worry. Little Emma sat beside her on the worn sofa, clutching her rag doll and looking confused by the tension she could sense but didn't understand. "They haven't come yet," Anna said quietly. "Perhaps they changed their minds?" Thomas knew better. Men like Sullivan's collectors didn't change their minds. They only got more violent when their initial intimidation failed to work. A heavy knock at the front door cut off his response. 3 deliberate raps, followed by silence. Anna's face went white, and Emma pressed closer to her mother. "Take Emma to the cellar," Thomas said quietly. "Stay there until I come for you." Anna nodded, scooping Emma into her arms and hurrying toward the kitchen, where the cellar stairs were located. Thomas waited until he heard their footsteps below, then opened the front door. 3 men stood on the narrow porch. The leader was a tall, heavy-set Irishman named Seamus Murphy, whose reputation for violence was well known throughout the South Side. Behind him stood 2 younger men, brothers named Connor and Liam Byrne. "Evening," Murphy said, his accent thick with Dublin brogue. "I'm here to see Mrs. Kowalski about a business matter." "She's not available," Thomas replied evenly. Murphy's eyes narrowed as he studied Thomas. "And who might you be?" "I'm a tenant here. Thomas Brennan." "Brennan, is it?" Murphy smiled coldly. "Irish name. You should understand then. We're just trying to help our fellow immigrants. The neighborhood can be dangerous for a woman alone with a young child. Accidents happen, you know." "What kind of accidents?" Thomas asked. Connor Byrne spoke up with eager cruelty. "Oh, all sorts. Fires, mostly. These old buildings, they go up like kindling, sometimes with people still inside." Thomas felt the familiar cold anger settling in his chest. "That sounds like a threat." "Not a threat," Murphy said smoothly. "Just a fact of life. But for a small monthly fee, we can make sure Mrs. Kowalski and her little girl stay safe." "And if she can't pay?" Liam Byrne laughed harshly. "Then she'll learn that there are consequences for not being neighborly." Thomas studied the 3 men, calculating distances and angles. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Mrs. Kowalski doesn't have the kind of money you're asking for." "Then she'll have to find it," Murphy replied. "Or find another place to live." preferably before something unfortunate happens to her or that sweet little girl of hers. The casual mention of Emma, said with predatory malice, shattered Thomas's self-control. His hand moved to his gun with practiced speed, and suddenly Murphy was staring down the barrel of a Colt .45. "Gentlemen," Thomas said, his voice deadly calm, "I think it's time for you to leave." Murphy's eyes widened, but he recovered quickly. "You're making a big mistake, friend. Mr. Sullivan doesn't forget when people cross him." "Neither do I," Thomas replied. "And right now, you're threatening a woman and child under my protection." Connor Burns started to reach inside his coat, but Thomas's gun swung toward him. "I wouldn't. I've killed men for less than what you've already said tonight." Something in Thomas's voice made all three men take a step backward. "This isn't over," Murphy said. "Mr. Sullivan will hear about this." "I'm counting on it," Thomas replied. "Tell Mr. Sullivan that if he or his men come near this house again, they'll be dealing with me directly." The three men retreated into the darkness, but Murphy turned back. "You just signed that woman and child's death warrant, Brennan. We'll be back, and next time we won't be so polite." Thomas watched them disappear, then made his way to the cellar, where he found Anna and Emma huddled together. Emma was crying quietly, her face buried against her mother's shoulder. "Are they gone?" Anna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "For now," Thomas replied. "But they'll be back, probably with more men." Anna closed her eyes in despair. "Then we have no choice but to pay them." "No," Thomas said firmly. "There's another choice. But it's dangerous, and it means I'll have to ask you to trust me completely." Thomas knelt down, so he was at eye level with little Emma. The child looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Emma," he said gently, "do you remember what I told you about being brave?" The little girl nodded solemnly. "You said brave people protect the ones they love." "That's right. And sometimes, protecting people means making hard choices." Thomas looked up at Anna. "I'm going to end this, but I need you and Emma to stay hidden until it's safe." "What are you going to do?" Anna asked. Thomas stood up, his face grim with purpose. "What I should have done 3 years ago in Montana Territory. What I should have done the first time innocent people were threatened, while I had the power to stop it." For the first time since arriving in Pittsburgh, Thomas Brennan felt like himself again. Not the broken ex-lawman hiding from his past, but the man who had once stood between civilization and chaos on the American frontier. Thomas spent the early morning hours walking through Pittsburgh's South Side, formulating a plan. By sunrise, he had decided to take the fight directly to Patrick Sullivan's organization, starting with Seamus Murphy. He returned to find Anna preparing breakfast with mechanical precision, her movements betraying the sleepless night she'd endured. Little Emma sat at the kitchen table, drawing pictures with a stub of pencil. "Morning, Emma," Thomas said, settling into the chair beside her. "What are you drawing?" The 7-year-old looked up with eyes that seemed older than they had just days before. "It's our house," she said solemnly, "but I drew walls around it to keep the bad men away." The simple innocence of the statement hit Thomas like a physical blow. This child should be worried about dolls and games, not building fortifications against adult cruelty. "That's very smart," he said gently. "But you know what? Sometimes the best way to keep bad men away is to make sure they can't come back at all." He spent the morning making preparations and gathering intelligence. Murphy lived alone in a rented room above a butcher shop on East Carson Street. He usually made his collections during the day when potential witnesses would be at work. "Mrs. Kowalski," Thomas said quietly, "I need you to pack a bag for yourself and Emma. Just the essentials." "Are we leaving?" Anna asked. "No, but I want you to stay with someone safe until this is resolved. Do you have friends who could take you in for a few days?" Anna nodded. "Mrs. Novak, the baker's wife. She has children Emma's age." "Good. Take Emma there this afternoon, and don't come back until I send word." That evening, Thomas positioned himself in an alley across from the butcher shop where Murphy lived. He'd changed into the dark suit he'd worn as a deputy marshal, and the familiar weight of the gun at his hip felt like greeting an old friend. At 8 o'clock, Murphy appeared on the street, walking with confident swagger. He was alone, the first stroke of luck Thomas had encountered. Thomas stepped out of the shadows as Murphy approached his building. "Evening, Mr. Murphy." Murphy spun around, his hand moving toward the knife Thomas knew he carried. When he recognized Thomas, his scarred face twisted into a sneer. "Well, if it isn't the boarding house hero. Come to apologize for last night's rudeness?" In a manner of speaking, Thomas replied calmly, "I've come to give you a chance to walk away from this. Stop the collections, leave the Kowalski family alone, and we can call it even." Murphy laughed harshly. "You think you can threaten me? Boy, I was cracking skulls when you were still sucking at your mother's teat, and Mr. Sullivan doesn't negotiate with nobodies." "Then Mr. Sullivan is about to learn an expensive lesson," Thomas said. Murphy's hand moved toward his weapon, but Thomas was faster. The Colt appeared in his hand with fluid motion, its barrel trained on Murphy's chest. "Slowly," Thomas commanded. "Use 2 fingers to pull out whatever you're carrying. Then drop it." Murphy complied, revealing a wicked-looking knife that clattered to the cobblestones. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life, Brennan." "No," Thomas replied quietly. "The biggest mistake of my life was made 3 years ago in Montana Territory, when I failed to stop men like you from hurting innocent people. I'm not making that mistake again." "You can't just kill me in the street," Murphy protested. "Look around," Thomas said. Murphy's eyes darted to the empty street, the shuttered windows where families had learned to mind their own business when violence erupted. "Your friends in the police department won't investigate too hard, and the witnesses, they'll be too grateful to see you gone to remember anything useful." Murphy's bravado cracked for the first time. "Listen, we can work something out." "It's too late for negotiations," Thomas interrupted. "You threatened a child, Murphy. A 7-year-old girl who never hurt anyone. That's a line you don't cross." The gunshot echoed off the narrow buildings like thunder. Murphy staggered backward, looking down at the spreading red stain on his shirt with surprise and disbelief. He tried to speak, but only blood came out. Thomas holstered his weapon and walked away without looking back. Behind him, Seamus Murphy collapsed to the cobblestones, dead before he hit the ground. But killing Murphy was only the beginning. The Byrne brothers would come next, followed by others in Sullivan's organization. Thomas had started something that could only end one way, with either justice or his own death. As he walked through the dark streets, Thomas thought about little Emma Kowalski drawing protective walls around her house. Tomorrow, he would begin building those walls for real, one dead criminal at a time. News of Seamus Murphy's death spread through Pittsburgh's south side like wildfire. By morning, everyone was buzzing with whispered conversations about the Irish enforcer found dead with a bullet in his chest. Thomas arrived at the steel mill to find his fellow workers casting nervous glances in his direction. Mickey O'Brien approached him during lunch break. "Tommy," Mickey said quietly, "there's talk that Sullivan is bringing in men from Philadelphia. Professional killers. They're saying whoever shot Murphy signed his own death warrant." Thomas nodded grimly. "How many men?" "4, maybe 5. They'll be here by tonight." That afternoon, Thomas returned to check on Anna and Emma, only to find Mrs. Novak waiting with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Brennan," the baker's wife said, "something terrible has happened. Men came to my shop asking about Anna and little Emma. When I wouldn't tell them anything, they hurt my husband." Thomas felt his blood turn to ice. "How badly?" "Broken ribs, maybe worse. They said if Anna doesn't come home by tonight, they'll start killing everyone who helped her hide." The calculated cruelty was breathtaking. Sullivan's men had turned the entire neighborhood into a weapon against Anna and Emma. "Where are they now?" Thomas asked. "Hidden in the church basement," Mrs. Novak replied. "Father O'Malley is protecting them. Tell Anna to stay hidden no matter what she hears, and to keep Emma away from the windows." As evening approached, Thomas made his final preparations. He positioned himself in the narrow alley behind the boarding house, knowing that Sullivan's men would come there first. He didn't have to wait long, for men approached just as the street lamps were being lit. Thomas recognized the Byrne brothers immediately, but the other 2 were strangers, hard-faced professionals. Thomas waited until they were all in position, then stepped out of the shadows with his gun drawn. "Gentlemen," he called out softly, "I believe you're looking for me." The response was immediate and deadly. Liam Byrne spun toward him, clawing for his pistol, while one of the Philadelphia men dove for cover. Thomas's first shot took Liam in the chest, spinning him backward into the brick wall. Connor Byrne emerged from the doorway with a sawed-off shotgun, but Thomas was already moving. He rolled behind a pile of refuse as the shotgun roared, sending splinters flying through the air. The two Philadelphia killers had spread out, trying to catch him in a crossfire. These were professionals, not clumsy street thugs. A bullet whined off the brick wall inches from his head. Thomas counted muzzle flashes. Both professional killers were firing, but Connor seemed to be reloading. Thomas sprinted across the narrow alley toward the opposite building. Bullets chased him across the open space, but his timing was perfect. He reached cover just as Connor's shotgun boomed again. From his new position, Thomas had a clear shot at one of the Philadelphia men. His Colt barked twice in rapid succession, and the killer staggered backward. "Brennan!" Connor Byrne shouted. "You killed my brother, you bastard." "Your brother chose his path," Thomas called back, "just like you're choosing yours." The remaining Philadelphia killer tried to circle around behind Thomas, but the narrow alley limited his options. Thomas heard footsteps on wooden stairs, a mistake that revealed the man's position. Thomas aimed carefully and fired 3 shots through the thin wooden wall. He was rewarded by the sound of a body tumbling down the stairs. That left only Connor Byrne, who had switched to a pistol. The young Irishman advanced with reckless determination. "This is for Liam," Connor screamed, firing wildly as he charged. Thomas took careful aim and squeezed the trigger. Connor Byrne stumbled, looked down at the blood spreading across his shirt, then collapsed face first onto the cobblestones. The sudden silence was deafening, for men lay dead in the narrow space behind the boarding house, a grim testament to the price of threatening innocent people. As if summoned by his thoughts, footsteps echoed from the street. Thomas tensed, but the voice that called out was familiar. "Tommy? Tommy, are you back there?" It was Mickey O'Brien, accompanied by a dozen other mill workers, carrying clubs, hammers, and old rifles, men who had finally decided they'd had enough of living in fear. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Mickey whispered, staring at the bodies. "You did all this alone." "It's not finished," Thomas warned. "Sullivan will send more men. Anyone who stands with me now is signing up for a war." Mickey spat on the ground. "These bastards have been bleeding us dry for too long. It's past time someone stood up to them." A murmur of agreement ran through the group of workers. Thomas saw the same expression on all their faces. Men pushed beyond their breaking point, finally ready to fight back. 3 hours later, Thomas stood at the head of nearly 30 men, mill workers, dock laborers, shop owners, and immigrants from a dozen different countries, all united by their hatred of Patrick Sullivan's reign of terror. The Shamrock Saloon sat on Carson Street, like a fortress of corruption, its windows glowing with yellow light, and its doors guarded by Sullivan's men. "Remember," Thomas told his makeshift army, "we're not murderers. Any man who surrenders lives, but anyone who fights dies. And Sullivan is mine." The attack began at midnight. Thomas led the charge through the front door, while Mickey's group smashed through the back entrance. Gunfire erupted throughout the saloon as tables were overturned for cover, and men fought with desperate fury. Thomas pushed through the chaos, cutting down anyone who stood between him and the back room where Patrick Sullivan waited. He found the ward boss behind his desk, a nickel-plated revolver in his hand. Sullivan was a small, wiry man in his 50s, but his reputation for ruthlessness was legendary. "Thomas Brennan," Sullivan said, "the famous gunfighter from Montana Territory. Did you really think you could destroy everything I've built?" "I came here to escape violence," Thomas replied, his gun steady. "But men like you don't leave innocent people alone. You had to threaten a child." Sullivan's laugh was bitter. "A child? One Polish immigrant brat? You're destroying the livelihoods of hundreds of people for the sake of one worthless." Thomas's first shot cut off Sullivan's words, catching the ward boss in the shoulder. The second shot shattered his gun hand. "Her name," Thomas said quietly, advancing on the wounded man, "is Emma Kowalski. She's 7 years old. She loves to draw pictures, and she's learning to read. And she deserves to grow up in a world where men like you can't hurt her." Sullivan clutched his wounds, blood seeping between his fingers. You can't kill me. I'm connected to everyone who matters in this city. Then they'll have to find new sources of income, Thomas replied. The final shot echoed through the suddenly quiet saloon. Patrick Sullivan slumped forward across his desk, dead at last. As dawn broke over Pittsburgh, Thomas walked slowly back toward St. Patrick's Church. The streets were stirring with early risers, but there was something different in their posture, a straightness to their shoulders that hadn't been there the day before. He found Anna and Emma in the church basement, both awake and waiting. Emma ran to him as soon as she saw him, wrapping her small arms around his waist. "Mr. Brennan," she exclaimed, "Mama said you were fighting the bad men. Did you win?" Thomas knelt down to her level, seeing hope and trust in her dark eyes. "Yes, Emma. We won. The bad men won't bother you or your mama anymore." "Does that mean I can go home now?" she asked. "Yes," Thomas said gently. "You can go home. And you can grow up without being afraid." As the three of them walked back through the morning streets toward the boarding house, Thomas felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he'd carried for 3 long years. He'd finally kept his promise, to himself, to the memory of those he'd failed to save, and to a 7-year-old girl who'd asked him what it meant to be brave. Emma skipped ahead of them, chattering excitedly about returning to her room and her drawings. Anna walked beside Thomas in comfortable silence. "What will you do now?" she asked. Thomas looked up at the building that had been his home for 3 years. "I don't know. For the first time in years, I have choices." "You'll always have a home here," Anna said softly. "Emma and we owe you everything." "You don't owe me anything," Thomas replied. "Sometimes good people just need to stand up for each other. That's all I did." But as he watched Emma run up the front steps, clutching her rag doll and laughing with pure joy, Thomas knew he'd done something more. He'd redeemed himself, transformed his past failures into present courage, and given a child the future she deserved. The neighborhood was free, the innocent were protected, and Thomas Brennan had finally learned to live with honor again. If you like this story, leave your opinion in the comments and, of course, leave a like and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Big hug and see you soon.